I used to read all of Tom Clancy's novels.
Really?
I loved them. Red October, I was all up in it. And
Patriot
then
Games, all
yep.
those.
And when Alec Baldwin did Hunt for Red October, I loved that movie. And then I was fine when Harrison Ford took it over in the movie thing. So I have been looking forward to the new version of Jack Ryan that's on Amazon.
I saw it.
Wait, what?
I saw the whole thing. Totally out of character for me, I know. But I was home visiting my rather conservative ex-military parents, and we had to figure out what we were going to watch that none of us had seen, that we all had at least a passing interest in. And quite frankly, I can watch John Krasinski do anything because
he's
hubba hubba.
Adorable. And he bulked up for the, I mean, he is not John Krasinski from The Office.
He's John Krasinski from The Office with abs that you get to see frequently, which is great for me. What I was really struck by watching this, and I'm not going to, give any huge spoilers or anything, but what the setup of this is, CIA analyst becomes action star because he has a boring desk job at the very beginning, and then he becomes this, kick-ass guy out in the field. His main antagonist is this radical Islamist terrorist, right? So kind of the Osama bin Laden vein. And Jack Ryan is tall, white, good-looking, a complete Boy Scout, not really willing to compromise morally, with great abs. He's kind of perfect in every way, which makes it a little, it could be a little bit more interesting at times. But his antagonist is this picture of evil, and I was just waiting for, like, here comes the Islamophobia, right? Because I have Muslim friends, and I'm thinking about what are they thinking as they watch this. Well, what's interesting is that his boss is Muslim, an American Muslim working for the CIA who stands up to Islamophobia every once in a while. The terrorist's wife spends most of the series trying to escape because she doesn't like what's going on. Not even for political reasons, just because women are not treated well, and she has 2 young daughters. And the terrorist himself, you get to see where his hatred of the West came from. And parts of it comes from the fact that Lebanon was bombed to shit when he was a little kid. And guess who did it? The Americans. So it's nuanced in a way that I didn't expect it to be. But it's good. If you like the spy thriller Tom Clancy stuff,
Clancy.
You're going to love this.
I'm excited about it. Well, thank you for that little preview.
Attention, attention. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to Operating Room 1. Pop surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to Operating Room 1. Surgery is about to begin.
Hey, this is POPeration. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
And this week we are
talking about me.
Because you're funny.
I'm a funny girl. Okay. We're not talking
about you exactly, but we are talking about Funny Girl. 1968. So that makes it
50 damn years old.
50th anniversary. Yeah.
You know what?
What?
Funny Girl is an AARP member.
Now she is. Yeah.
Yeah, she is.
Directed by William Wyler, who is best known for movies not of this genre.
He was all over the map, though. Seriously. Ben-Hur.
Yep.
Roman Holiday, which those are 2 way different,
wildly different
things.
Experiences. And then to do a musical.
But this musical,
yeah,
it's very, but again, you know what? That just points to William Wyler's flexibility and what's the word I'm really looking for? Ability to do multiple different kinds of things.
I know what you mean.
Holy God.
What is that word?
We're awesome at word talking.
Versatility, I think, is the word you were looking for.
Exactly the word.
Okay, there you go. We catch on eventually. Well, funny though, it's like William Wyler was asked after, this movie was over if he enjoyed working with Barbara Streisand, and he said, it wasn't too bad considering this is the first film she ever directed. Ooh. Was what he said.
Well, and you know what? Here's what I'm going to say. It's 2018. So I'm going to say 10, 20 years ago, I would have said, well, she had that reputation and that's just kind of who she was. Everybody thought she was a bitch. 2018 hindsight, looking at it, I'm like, you know what? She probably just had strong opinions. And because she was a woman, these men got their panties in a wad. That's what I'm going to say. I could be wrong, but that's what it feels like because I just think that's the women they're hard to work with reputations much easier than men did.
What I will say about Barbara Streisand, though, is that she did eventually become a director, which tells me she wanted to make these decisions. She actually, which is not, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm saying she is a woman who did seek out that kind of leadership. And so I can believe that, that Barbara Streisand occasionally crossed that line between what an actor does in a set and what a director does in a set.
I think she always had opinions, always strong opinions, just based on everything I've read, seen, watched, whatever about her. Did she know more than William Wyler at this point in her career? Probably not. Maybe she could have been quieter and watched what he did and learned from it. At the same time, again, we don't really know the story. And so all of these, because there are a lot of women who had, quote, reputations of being hard to work with back in the day. And now looking back, I'm wondering, was it because they were really hard to work with? Were they really divas, or did they just have an opinion?
And I think it's interesting that this is a movie about a woman who had that reputation. The whole idea that, Fanny Brice just did what she wanted to do, and she's going to stick that pillow up her dress, whether Ziegfeld told her she could or not. That is an interesting parallel, which kind of makes her perfect to play this role. And maybe she was just, this is a bit of a stretch, I don't mean this literally, but maybe she was just, inspired by the character so much that she thought, you know what, I'm going to do what Fanny would have done. This is wrong for this scene, and I'm going to say so, and I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. I mean, on a film set, it's not the same as live theater. If you do something the director doesn't want you to do, they can yell cut and say, do it again. And you can keep filming it until you get what the director wants.
Right.
Depending on the strong will of both people involved, that can play out in a very different way.
Well, I know, I do believe that Omar Sharif did enjoy working with her. I thought I read something.
So to speak.
Oh, what did he say?
Oh, they had a big affair.
Oh, well, then there you go.
Yeah.
But my thing was what I was going to say about that was that I do know in Hello, Dolly, Walter Matthau and she hated each other.
Yes.
He literally had nothing good to say about her and would stay at the other end. So she did have this reputation, and it may be that a certain sort of man just didn't like it or whatever. On the hand, but obviously Omar Sharif, yes.
I think Omar Sharif had other things, occupying his mind at the same time.
So anywho.
So best, one of the things that this movie is best known for, looking back at my notes here, Barbara won her Oscar. Her only Oscar for performing, I think.
I think so.
So this is the one she won Best Actress.
Several times.
Nominated a couple times. But this is the one her film debut. She actually tied with Katharine Hepburn, her performance from The Lion in Winter, which I think it would be a crime if either one of these had not won an Oscar. So it just goes to show how stupid Oscars are, because two amazingly brilliant performances can be nominated in the same year, and very rarely is there a tie, but in this case there was. So they both got to take a little gold guy home with them. Basically, the plot of this movie, based on the true story of the early career and first marriage of famous Ziegfeld Follies star Fanny Brice from the early 20th century.
Well, I think I had to explain to my daughters what is vaudeville. And I think that we are so far away from it at this point.
Yep.
But it was basically stage show, variety shows.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And then you had some you had the burlesque side, which was Gypsy Rose Lee kind of veered into burlesque.
Yeah.
And comedians kind of walked that line in between. They could go one way or the other.
Yeah.
So you had comedians that did the burlesque route, and then you had those who were lucky enough to get into vaudeville.
So Gypsy Rose Lee, the most I know about her is honestly what I get from watching Gypsy multiple times, is that in burlesque they would strip, but not necessarily strip they would strip all the way down, but not their entire body would be visible to the audience. So it was risque, and it was something
it was called strip tease.
Yeah.
It was the tease part that you have to keep in mind.
So it wasn't something that you talked about in polite company. A lot of men went to go see burlesque shows without their wives, shall we say.
Oh, of course.
It was kind of the soft porn of the, Not quite, but I mean, it was. But
the reputation of those striptease artists, which is the same reputation they have now, is that they were hookers on the side.
Exactly. And so not a great, but Ziegfeld was always like the classy version of.
He was vaudeville though. He took he took vaudeville to a different level. Had lots of beautiful girls.
That's what his shows were known for. Is just tons and tons of beautiful women in skimpy outfits.
Yes,
but not bearing nothing indecent.
But
men
very
would
close.
take their wives to go see the new Ziegfeld. It was on Broadway. Ziegfeld Follies always opened up on Broadway.
Yep. You dressed to go to the theater. Yeah. It was a night at the theater.
And then they went on tours.
But it was really a vaudeville show on Broadway.
Yeah.
So it was classing up your regular vaudeville show. But it was always, that was a goal. To get into Ziegfeld Follies meant you had arrived. And so that was always a goal because you also made more money there.
And if you were a Ziegfeld girl, you were pretty. And that's one of the things that this movie does get into, which we'll talk about later, is that Fanny Brice, like Barbara Streisand, was, shall we say, unconventionally attractive. Beautiful in a sense, but doesn't necessarily meet all the beauty norms of her era.
Didn't have she didn't have the small nose, the blonde hair, the little petite frame. That was not who she was.
That was never who she was.
But that was usually who got long legs kind of thing. That's who got into showgirl. Those were showgirls.
Those were showgirls.
And they still
Fanny
are,
Brice
frankly.
was something a little different. She had a beautiful singing voice, and she was funny as hell. And so they would put her on she was the comic relief in Ziegfeld shows most of the time. And yet this movie and the Broadway show that it was based on was really all about what's the cost of being a quote unquote funny girl, and what's the inner life of somebody who spent their entire life making up for the fact that they weren't as pretty as all those other girls by making people laugh. And so there is there's a dramatic side definitely to this.
So it's semi-autobiographical. It's one of those that's quote based on a true story.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, that's all I'm going to say. It's based on a true story. Clearly, there's a lot of theatricality.
Fanny Brice didn't belt on a tugboat on the way out to meet the ship that
just like
Yentl. No, she did not. So yes,
you don't know. You weren't there.
That's
Eric.
true. I wasn't there. I wasn't on the tugboat. I have been on that tugboat though, and so as soon as it happened, our friend Faye immediately broke into "Don't Rain on My Parade," which was
Okay.
Yeah. Hi, Faye. Anyway, let's take a look at the cast of this thing. Obviously, Barbara Streisand as Fanny Brice. You can say a lot of things about Barbara. She's terrific in this movie.
She nailed it.
This is the reason to watch Funny Girl, is to watch Barbara Streisand's performance.
It's one of those where this is if you're going to do a biography of somebody, you want it to be as close to somebody that you can relate to. And I think that's what Barbara saw in this, and she nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you are at all interested, if you're not a Barbara Streisand person, if you've never, and I've heard some people say, I just don't like the sound of her voice. I don't understand those people, because to me, Barbara Streisand's got one of those instruments that it's objectively beautiful. But whatever. If you don't get why Barbara is what Barbara is, I'd say watch this movie. And if you still don't get it, you're just not a fan. And that's okay.
I will also say that if that's not a thing, that you don't want to do musicals or whatever, here's what I want to say. Watch What's Up, Doc with Barbara Streisand. And that's just her at her comedy best. She's brilliant in that. Watch that, and if you don't get it, then walk away and say, I'm not a Barbara Streisand fan.
This movie and that movie, I think, together would probably tell. Because in her later years as a recording artist, so much, it's like, it's someone once said, she performs now with Vaseline smeared all over the microphone, which is to say that everything is so lush and these orchestras have 4,000 strings and it all just sounds a little too perfect. I think she's very much a perfectionist. Here there was a little bit of grit still in her performance. She was young and it was just, to me, it was a little bit more honest. I prefer early Barbara, I think, to later Barbara, just in terms of her aesthetic.
I think so. I think she also was warmer back then.
Yeah.
And it may have been because the facade wasn't up. The shields weren't up.
Yeah.
So
her co-star in this movie is Omar Sharif, who we've already talked about the fact that, was not just her co-star on screen.
Not on screen, but off screen.
Yeah, also had a little bit of a fling with Miss Streisand while this was going on.
Here's what I'm going to say.
You couldn't tell.
Omar Sharif is beautiful.
which was important in this.
He needed to be so attractive that we understood her insecurities, because she's not unattractive in this, but she thinks she is. Mm-hmm. But as an audience, he's got to really be pretty in order for me to believe that she's feeling insecure about it.
There's a lyric in this movie that, to tell the truth, it hurt my pride. The groom was prettier than the bride. And it's true.
He is beautiful. Now, what I want to say about Omar Sharif is I first saw him in Lawrence of Arabia, which is an epic. Have you ever seen that?
I have.
He was wonderful, and I loved him. Saw him in Dr. Zhivago, meh. Okay, I was meh.
Probably what he's best known for.
But Lawrence of Arabia...
It was a long time ago I saw this movie.
It is. He is the hottest ever in the world. And so I loved him in that. Later stuff I loved him in. This one, I felt like, aside from what he looks like, he was miscast.
Yeah. No, Nick Arnstein, from what I can tell, does not have a Russian accent, first of all. And so that was just, there's moments where they asked Omar to sing. Oy. Which is interesting because Barbara's the only person practically who sings in this entire movie.
A little Rex Harrison-y.
A little. But again,
that's not why he was there.
No. He was there to be pretty, and he did that. I didn't necessarily sense a whole lot of chemistry between the two of them, which is interesting because they were carrying on behind the camera. You'd hope that some of that would cross over, but really
they didn't last, did they?
No.
I mean, I didn't see it on
and I
screen.
think they both knew this was a fling that was going to last the duration of the movie.
Yeah.
And that was it. She was married at the time, I think, to Elliot Gould.
Okay.
So, all right. Kay Medford, otherwise known in Butterfield 8, opposite Elizabeth Taylor, played the mother, Rose Bryce. I thought she was delightful.
She was adorable. I didn't have a problem with her at all.
Very fun. Anne Francis was upset that her role was not as large as she thought it was going to be when she first read the script. She was
very small.
But played Georgia, her friend from the Follies, and usually just a foil. Usually just, when she was at the theater and Fanny needed to express something, Georgia was there to ask the questions so that Fanny could say what was on her mind. And that's all we really saw of her. Walter Pidgeon, who co-starred with Anne Francis in Forbidden Planet, of all things, was also in Mrs. Miniver, played Florence Ziegfeld, who I thought was fantastic.
I love him. I absolutely love Walter Pidgeon, and he just lends a gravitas. And so it was perfect as Flo Ziegfeld. Yeah. It was perfect.
And really, when you've got anyone opposite, even young Barbara Streisand, who is supposed to be intimidating, that's a tall order for anybody. And he was. He just, without raising his voice, without doing anything, you could see why he could just say, start from the top, and everyone would be like, okay, Mr. Ziegfeld, yes, Mr. Ziegfeld. That was just what everyone did.
Barbara had presence, and maybe that's part of the problem with Omar Sharif. He had presence in Lawrence of Arabia. I did not really feel like he had presence in this movie, and maybe it's because he was uncomfortable, what he was, the whole thing. Yeah. I have no idea. But Barbara had presence the whole time. Walter had presence. And so when they were on screen together, that was much fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Finally, the last person in the cast I wanted to mention, not because she has such a huge role, but because it's a fun piece of trivia. Mrs. Straykosh was played by Mae Questel, best known for being the voice of Betty Boop throughout the early.
She was cute. I felt like she was brought to the forefront just because they had that song about Mrs. Straykosh. They, sing something, Mrs. Straykosh or whatever.
Oh, actually, the whole song is about her daughter. Sadie.
Right. Who's getting married, so she's going to be a Sadie. I get that, but I'm just saying that that's what I felt. But she was cute. The little ladies who played poker were fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she was the one that kind of got a little bit. She also, Mrs. Straykosh, attended the opening night of the Follies, which was a big scene in this, and she was adorable. Obviously, this was a Broadway show before it was a movie. Music by Julie Stein, who also wrote scores for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and he wrote the music for Gypsy, which we've already talked about. Lyrics by Bob Merrill, and I was like, who's Bob Merrill? So I looked him up on the internets. Otherwise known for classics like How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? And If I Knew You Were Coming, I'd Have Baked a Cake. Mambo Italiano. These were his big hits.
But here's what's funny is I know all of them.
That's true.
I mean, they have lasted the test of time. Now,
I guess. They're silly.
I'm not saying that they're hits now. I'm just saying that they're, I know all of those. And so it's kind of funny.
I will say that those songs in this movie are clever, much more clever than I would expect them to be if I had just heard that little bit of somebody's resume. The lyrics in this movie are very fun. And I don't know. I just thought, gosh, what else has this person done? And I didn't.
Do you know Mambo Italiano?
I do.
It's a fun song.
It's a fun song.
It's a very fun song.
Yeah.
But it's a way, what he has a way of putting words together that are, I think, easy to sing, easy to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you have the right music, obviously, Jules is good with music. And so it all worked together. I enjoyed it. I thought it was.
And even though it's been done to death, I mean, when you actually do listen to the lyrics of People Who Need People or The Luckiest People in the World, there is something, I don't want to use the word profound, but I already did. So there's something about the human experience there that is kind of knowing. And it was just kind of like, oh, as opposed to how much is that doggy in the window.
It's cliche now because it's 50 fucking years old.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time it wasn't.
But but that's what I'm saying. So, there is actually something there that, anyway, I was surprised. I wish that Bob Merrill had other chances to score musicals like this, because I think he was very, very good. The book was by a woman named Isabel Leonard, who originally it was her idea to do a story about Fanny Brice to begin with. She originally was passing this around as a screenplay. She wanted to do a straight screenplay, not a musical. And eventually Ray Stark found this screenplay and said, let's not do a movie, let's do a Broadway musical. So first of all, let's take it away from film and put it on stage. And let's put a bunch of songs in it. And let me get some songwriters together and we'll mount it on Broadway. So that's where it started. And when they turned it into a movie, they did ask Ms. Leonard to adapt her own play.
That was kind. They didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Once they had the rights, they didn't have to do that.
They didn't have to, but they did. And her, the scenes are also very funny in this. I mean, there's the whole, the one that comes to mind right now is when she and Nick are on the boat and they're having that whole conversation about, where I come from, eventually someone says, I don't know, why don't we get married? That whole bit, very funny, very cute. And when he does pop the question in the middle of her sipping a cocktail and she spews it all over everything and she's trying to play it cool. And when now, she's very good. She knows how to get into characters and really kind of do that. Ray Stark, interestingly, was Fanny Brice's son-in-law.
Did not know that.
I did not know that when I started doing this. So the baby in this thing, when she and Nick have a baby, that little girl grows up to be Ray Stark's wife. So how interesting it must have been for him on set to cast an infant and say, that's my wife someday. Interesting.
And,
right?
and how do I portray her mother and father?
Yeah.
That's a thing too.
Yeah.
And Nick was not portrayed as a good father.
No, I mean, doting, but not responsible.
Well, I read up and he disappeared in real life. He totally was gone when she was like 1 or 2.
Yeah. And maybe in a sense thought he was doing her a favor. Because he was
you were really wanting to rationalize the F out of this.
Well, no, he was
an ass.
Yeah, he's terrible.
He was a selfish, gambling ass.
Yeah, it's terrible. But also, yes, and he, terrible person. And why would you, might it have been easier just to disappear as opposed to?
Well, I'm sure it was easier for him.
Yeah. Well, yes. It's interesting. I just saw another film that we will be talking about later in our season. That I won't, but where somebody said, I ruin everything I touch, you should really just stay away from me. Mm-hmm. And this person did not take this advice. And you're like, take the advice. Like they're finally being honest. And I kind of, that I guess as we're talking about this, I'm reminded of that. And maybe he kind of felt that way because he was bad news. I mean, he's just bad news all over the place.
There were so many red flags. It wasn't even funny.
Yeah, no.
My mother saw it.
Yeah, everybody saw it. And you were just kind of like, and you looked at her when she said, please marry me. There were perhaps reasons for that, which we'll discuss after the break. But you do watch this movie and go, no, don't do it. This is a bad choice. This is not a good man for you to pin your hopes on. And so in that sense, maybe young, what was her name?
What are you talking
about
daughter right now? Oh, I didn't remember.
Maybe was better off without Nick around.
No, I think she probably was better off without him. But at the same time, I'm sitting here looking at it, going, he could have been a better person.
Oh, totally.
And,
yes, in every way.
But he wasn't.
Yep.
So happy.
Yeah.
Funny girl.
So funny girl. And yeah. So you go into a movie called Funny Girl and you expect her to be funny, and she is. But as I said before, I think what in a lot of ways what this movie is about is that somebody who is, it's the whole Tears of a Clown thing, right? Mm-hmm. Thank you, Smokey Robinson. That whole idea of behind that facade,
well, a lot of times,
whole lot going on.
The funny comes from great tragedy or great suffering.
Or insecurity.
Yeah. Or all combination.
Yep.
And so that's what we had, some of that in this. So anyway, we're going to take a little quick break, and we'll be back talking about more Girl That Be Funny. We're talking about Barbara Streisand in the movie Funny Girl, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year.
1968.
ARP member.
Yeah.
It's crazy because it is a different world. It's a totally different world. And we were talking about where funny comes from, and you know, talking about bad stuff that happens to you or happens around you or whatever places you come from. But you're right. A lot of this, and it started at the very beginning because at the first scene of her running out, I guess, to the audition, her mom's poker buddies are sitting there and they're talking about how, do what you can with what you've got because you're not very pretty.
Yeah.
Thank God you're funny or whatever.
And they're not even saying that. They're basically saying, give this dream up. You do not belong on the stage.
Well, you're never going to get there.
If a girl isn't pretty, like a Miss Atlantic City, all she gets from life is pity. And that's where that's kind of what they feel.
What part of, I mean, when you hear lines like that, you can totally understand it's the how much is that doggy in the window guy?
Maybe.
I mean, seriously. But anyway, and that was what was interesting to me is I didn't remember a long time ago when I first saw it it is just hammered that not only does she think she's not pretty, but everybody around her is enforcing that.
Well, she's been told how ugly she is her entire life. They don't use the word ugly, but they do say not pretty enough times. She gets it, and she walks into the entrance. Well, actually, it's not even an audition. She got the job. It's her first day of rehearsals as part of the 8 Beautiful Girls 8 at this vaudeville house, in Brooklyn, I guess. And she walks into the theater and the doorman's trying to stop her. And she's like, no, I'm one of the makeup helps a lot, really. And that's kind of, so she knows. It's like, this is she's a bagel on a plate full of onion rolls. So
now I will say this, Barbara, while not conventionally pretty, is very pretty.
Yes.
So it's a little weird when you're seeing at the beginning, especially. Maybe they could have done something less makeup. I don't know, whatever, because she was again, you're still sitting there going, sweetie, but you're all pretty.
And yet the people who were lobbying for this role on Broadway and even for the movie, because they weren't sure they were going to use Barbara Streisand for the movie. She'd never opened a movie before. The world did know who she was. This wasn't like a complete entrance. She'd done a television special. She'd won a Tony already. She was on Broadway as Fanny Bryce.
But I get her in Broadway easier. The problem with the movie is there's a close-up and all this.
But like Anne Bancroft was up for this role. Okay? Anne Bancroft is much more, quote-unquote, conventionally attractive than Barbara Streisand was. I think Barbara was better for this role because of that. Because you did need someone who was striking and beautiful in her own sense, but didn't quite meet the norms. And she looked a lot like Fanny Bryce. I mean, if you look at old photos of Fanny Bryce, that was pretty much,
she's much prettier than Fanny Bryce.
She's much prettier than Fanny Bryce was because she knows how to work it and she knows how to, but there were some similarities there. But so much of this movie is so wrapped up in, am I pretty? Am I pretty enough? What do I need to do to make up for the fact that I'm not beautiful? So the whole, the big scene that to me is both the most delightful and also kind of a turning point in this movie is her opening night at the Follies. And she's in the middle of this huge production number all about brides, right? So let's just, take a moment to appreciate the piling on of what we do to women in this society and how, your wedding day is supposed to be the be all end all and it's all downhill from there kind of a, thing. But all this stuff that's put on your wedding day, and you've got all of these gorgeous women with their huge boobs and tiny waists wearing next to nothing but huge veils.
It is as big a showgirl number as Vegas has ever
on a staircase that just goes and goes and goes and goes. It has 120 steps on it.
Tall, blonde, waspish, beautiful women.
And all you know about it ahead of time is that Ziegfeld says, I need a strong voice to do the bride number. So in the middle of the bride number, she's supposed to come out and sing, I am the beautiful reflection of my love's affection, a walking illustration of his adoration. So the whole song is about how gorgeous she is.
Yes.
And she doesn't feel pretty enough to do it. She can't.
And she's argued with him. And she said, I shouldn't be doing.
I can't sing words like this.
And in fact, she said, let me just not do this song. Ziegfeld says, if you don't do this song, you don't do the show. And she's like, oh, okay.
Okay. And she's not used to being told no. She doesn't like that. So when opening night comes around, she does make her appearance and she does sing those words, but with a big pillow stuffed up her dress so as to appear about 8 months pregnant.
In the movie, the story is that she just decided on the spur of the moment 2 seconds before she went on stage.
Well, at least that's what she tells Ziegfeld. I don't know if I believe that even in the movie.
Right. But. And I don't, and who knows whether that's true or not. It certainly makes it's a fun moment. And, so she's standing there straight, looking at the audience, and then she turns to the side, and of course the audience laughs their asses off, and that's what saves her. Had the audience not laughed, Ziegfeld would have fired her on the spot.
Exactly.
He basically says this to her at the end. He said, "That was great. Don't do that anymore." But I mean, do the same thing every night, but don't.
But if you ever disobey me again, you're gone.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden those words take on a much different meaning. I am the beautiful reflection of my love's affection. He knocked me up, kind of a thing. And then it's okay that she's ridiculous. And not only that, occasionally she quacks like a duck while she's supposed to be doing this beautiful kind of aria thing.
Well, her idea is, and she says this, they are laughing because I control what they're laughing at. They're not laughing at me. But it's I'm controlling. They're laughing at me, but I am doing that. I'm doing it on purpose. And that is something that I think we still, as human beings, deal with, is that sometimes you want to control the narrative.
Yeah.
And that was what she was doing.
Yeah.
And
so she could take ownership of who she was, what she looked like. The bigger question is, did she marry this guy with a ton of red flags around it simply because he made her feel like she was beautiful? And maybe for the first time in her life, there was somebody who truly made her feel beautiful. Was that the sum total
My
of her
feeling
attraction?
was he was so pretty that the fact that he wanted to be with her, that it's like, this is a club I want to be a part of. And so if he is willing to marry me, then that it's like I get pretty points for just being attached to him. That's how I saw it, is that it was a matter of the red flags. She was ignoring all those. She'd ignore those from the beginning because he was so good looking. And I think that...
And she also wasn't used to being seduced. You get the sense she'd never had a boyfriend before.
Now, that's in the movie, but in real life, she'd been married before. So just an FYI.
Yeah.
Not for long. Childhood, whatever. They got married, divorced, whatever. But they didn't mention that at all in the movie. So in the movie, we're thinking she's this innocent.
Mm-hmm.
So he did a great job. He was a great con man, and he was good looking. And I think that if you don't have a lot of sophistication in that area, you can very well be taken advantage of, which I believe she was. But I think it was that low self-esteem that if he wants me, then I'm going to be with this person that makes me feel worthy.
Yeah. And in the very, spoiler, the marriage does not last. In one of the final scenes of the movie, when she's reflecting on their life together, she says, "You made me feel kind of beautiful for a while." Those are her exact words. And it's like, if that's the sum total of, so that was very telling to me as to why she would have abandoned all reason and not listened to her mother.
Right. And I think that, that is a psychological thing, in that you have to, and again, this was the early 1900s, so psychology wasn't really a big thing. It was just in its infancy. But the idea that you can't, your happiness can't come from the outside. And if you are dependent on someone else to make you happy or make you feel good or on your self-esteem, then you can't ever be truly whatever it is. Feel good about yourself, be happy, be whatever. And I think that this proved that, is that she had put all of her eggs in that basket, and it was a bad basket. And
then the question is, what did he see in her? Which I think what he saw in her was just what everyone else could see in her, is that she's delightful.
She clearly had a presence, and she was funny. He did like that she was funny.
He and who doesn't like someone in their life who makes them laugh?
Exactly. But he also
That's why we put up with each other for 25 years.
Damn straight, because there is nothing else. There is nothing else. But I think that he was charmed by her, and the fact that he thought she was funny, that also can make you feel like someone is more attractive if they if they're funny. And
who knows, maybe she made him feel smarter.
Correct.
Correct. I mean, in a lot of ways, because he probably...
Or worthy, because he was already an ass.
He's a jerk.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't have a home. He flits around. He just, he gambles for a living. And here's someone who, show business is not the most stable thing in the world, but she's making an honest dollar and very successful.
But she also has faith in him.
Yeah.
So he feels like he could do anything.
Yeah. So kind of a mismatched, from the beginning, people with very different goals and aims of what they want out of life. And really the movie does kind of track to, because Fanny Brice did a whole lot more after she divorced Nick Arnstein. This movie could have decided to, go on for another couple of decades before saying the end, but they made a decision that this movie would really be about the early part of her career, which was by no means over when this marriage ended, but it ended when the marriage was over and she said goodbye.
And what they were able to do with that is then create Funny Lady, which was the sequel to that.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah.
Don't even know.
I mean, I don't remember. I know I saw it. I just can't tell you. I can't tell you much about it except James Caan was in it.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
Just bad. I mean, it was just one of those things like how could anybody involved in the first one? And I don't know that anybody but Streisand was involved with the first one, came back for the second one. It was just, it worse than Grease 2 in terms of the sequel that just did not measure up.
If your reason is not valid for doing, we've talked about this, for doing a sequel, don't do it.
Yeah.
And if your reason is just money, always a bad reason.
Well, and it's possible that Streisand did do a whole bunch of research into Fanny Brice's life and said there's so much more here because she had this whole affair with Billy Rose. Let's do that. That could be just as powerful.
But you've got to get it done with quality people.
Oh, but the songs were terrible and the pacing was terrible and the script was terrible. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about, where this came from. The notion that it was a Broadway show before it came to the screen. I'm always kind of, as a theater person, it's interesting to me when I see a musical and then it's made into a movie musical, the changes that are often made as a result. The song Funny Girl was actually not in the stage show.
Okay.
Even though the stage show was called Funny Girl, that particular song was not there. I believe, I have no evidence for this whatsoever other than that everybody does this. Every time we have a movie musical nowadays, they usually write one song that's brand new just for the movie so somebody can get nominated for Best Original Song.
Yeah, that's probably true. That makes sense. That makes sense. I'm fine with that because I don't give a crap about the Oscars.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. But it's interesting that they tend to do that. The song that Funny Girl replaced was a song called "The Music That Makes Me Dance," which I've heard The Music That Makes Me Dance. I think Funny Girl's a better song. Okay. So but maybe it's because I heard it a million times because I've seen this movie a million times before I ever heard the first one. But it's a perfectly wonderful song. A bunch of songs were cut. The Music That Makes Me Dance was cut. There's a song called Henry Street, which was originally after her big opening night at Follies when they all go back to the party. There's a big chorus number called Henry Street about just kind of setting the stage of where she came from. And then there was a song called Who Taught Her Everything that was sung by her mother and her friend, Danny. Is that his name?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Who
I really liked him. I could have seen another scene with him.
Yeah.
He was adorable. I would have liked to see a little bit more of their buddy relationship.
Yeah, and I think there's more of him in the stage show than there was. Same with Georgia. Same kind of story. But they sang a song together after she got her telegram from Ziegfeld. Basically, the song was about she's going to be a big star now, and will she even remember those of us who taught her everything? And they were already lamenting the fact that, what that song was there for was so that Barbara Streisand could do a costume change.
Sure.
And when they were making a movie and no longer needed time to do a costume change, they just cut the song because apparently it wasn't that.
Well, I mean, and I'll be honest, I got a very clear idea of what Henry Street was all about in that community, so I didn't need a song about it, to be honest. Yeah. So I'm fine with that cut.
Yep, and I think we both knew who the mom was and who the friend was.
Correct.
Without having a whole song that was just there so that Barbara Streisand could get into a costume to audition with. Most of If a Girl Isn't Pretty was cut, and you can tell, like, they cut the song even before there's like a rhyme that you're expecting. Yes. And all of a sudden Barbara Streisand's walking out the door, and I think that William Wyler just said, we get the point. We got it. We don't need to.
It was one of those that it was a little jarring because I went, well, that was a weird ending. And then I forgot about it because it was enough. And that sounds awful. Now, could he have gone one more line to get us the ending? Probably. Whatever, Bill. But I was, again, another thing where I'm fine with that cut. Just because I get it. Yeah. You all think she's ugly. You've told her this for all her life. Done. Check.
And it might have seemed like they were just piling the abuse
That's
on.
What it felt like. If I think that had it gone on, I would have felt that very much because I was already uncomfortable.
But it's a bizarre cut. It's the first song of the movie, I believe. The whole thing's a flashback, but I don't think we get any songs in the initial bit. And for the first song to just have this bizarre cutoff, and all of a sudden she's walking down the street, and the music is still going on, but there are no lyrics that like actually resolve that rhyme that you're kind of expecting. It was just weird. There was a couple of songs that were added, which Julie Stein did not want to be added because he didn't write them. But two songs that Fanny Brice actually did sing, was famous for singing. I'd Rather Be Blue, which is a great number from the movie. This is when she's working at Keeney's, the vaudeville house in Brooklyn. And she was invited by Eddie. That was his name. His name was Eddie.
Yeah. Well
Eddie brought her in over Mr. Keeney's objections, secretly brought her back to be part of a roller skating number based on her word that she could roller skate. She cannot roller skate.
Correct.
So she ruins this number, this chorus number where these, this novelty thing where these girls are on skates and they're singing a song called The Roller Skate Rag. And the audience likes her because she messes up with aplomb and she's funny.
Right.
Even when she's, doing everything wrong. He wheels her back out on stage and says, sing a song, tells the spotlight, go to her. And she starts singing this song called I'd Rather Be Blue, which is about I'd rather be sad and alone thinking of you than with anybody else but you. And she sings it and it's delightful, and she skates a lot better when she's by herself and doesn't have to worry about choreography. And it becomes like now she's the hit of Keeney's. And so this is kind of the beginning of her career, and eventually how Ziegfeld, gets her. Fanny Brice sang that song, was famous for it. The other song that she sang that she was famous for was My Man. And you can find it on YouTube. You can find Fanny Brice singing My Man on YouTube. Doesn't sing it like Barbara does because, this was in the 20s. And
it was
Barbara
a different style as well.
The late 60s.
Yeah.
So a whole different thing. Barbara takes many more liberties than Fanny Brice would have. But My Man in its entirety, there's a line that they cut all about how the fact that My Man beats me, that was taken out of the movie. Good, I think.
Yeah, we were getting close to where women's lib was a big, if there had been hashtags, that it would have been hashtag women's lib. Feminism was on its rise. The idea that was okay to beat your wife, keep her under control, was not acceptable.
Yeah, but Julie Stein hated this because his show ended with a reprise of Don't Rain on My Parade. And that was her I will survive kind of moment. Yes, this marriage ended, but I will live to see another day. Don't rain on my parade. I'll be back. Kind of, it was an optimistic kind of, even though the marriage ended, he wanted to end on an optimistic, empowering note. My Man is just all about how he's dreadful, but I love him and I just can't help it.
I will be honest with you. I agree with Jules Stein on this. I didn't care for that being at the end. I thought I did not want that song in there at that time. Had it been earlier, and I could have gotten to a point, but for me, she had empowered herself, and then she sang that song, and that negated everything.
Yeah, and that's the way Julie Stein felt.
And I agree with him completely.
Didn't like it. Now, she sounds amazing while she's singing it. I'll give her that.
No, but it felt very showboat. Remember that, can't help loving that man of mine. I mean, it's like, dear God, come on.
Yeah.
It's and here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to bring this up now, maybe whatever. My biggest problem with this movie was mostly the hairstyles.
Talk about the hair.
Because it was 68 hairstyles from the get-go. Ain't nobody in the 20s, teens, whatever, wear their hair like Barbara did anywhere. And so that puts me, I'm aware the whole movie that this was not made in the early 30s or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm aware that this is not a documentary because the hairstyles are from 1968. And
but for everybody or just Barbara? Because I felt like the chorus girls in the 8 Beautiful Girls 8 at Keeney's looked very...
Some of them did, but some of them didn't. I mean, you do have a bob, which was happening in the early 20th century, but the boof that you would put to the bob, that happened in the 60s. So it was a take on, and a lot of times in the 60s, we talked about it during Bonnie and Clyde, they would take what was real and just kind of zhuzh it for whatever, the time, 67 or at that time, and this was 68. Barbara's hair and her claws, come on, Barbara's nails are Barbara's nails in every movie she ever did.
Yeah.
They are the third character. Whoever is the first, second, her nails are third.
Third billing.
Third billing. But I can get over the nails. The hair was killing me. So what I'm saying, I'm sitting there and I'm watching this. It took place in the early 20th century, but I'm looking at her 1968 hair. She always looked, it was good and cute and everything, but it was clearly mid 20th century. And then after empowering herself, because it's 68, she sings this. It was just too much. It was just too much.
Yeah.
I didn't like that at all.
I will say I agree with you about the hair, and I think it's probably more jarring for somebody in 2018 to watch a movie that was supposed to be the teens and just the teens, right? We didn't even get into the 20s.
Yeah, I think it was the teens, early. We weren't in Prohibition yet.
Yeah, so the 19 teens.
Teens and
it's more jarring for us to watch a movie that's supposed to be set then that has these 60s hairstyles that we don't see today.
The clothes looked like they were close. They were maybe tricked a little bit.
But if you were in 1968 watching this and it was a contemporary hairstyle, you might not notice it as much just because our lenses change. And I would also say that Bonnie and Clyde probably had more of you could get away with saying this was an aesthetic choice because we wanted to portray Bonnie as more of a woman of today than a woman of then. And that was something that we were doing on purpose. I don't really see that being a good justification for having Fanny Bryce.
I had a problem with this hair all the way through. And I was always conscious that it was, it was a movie, and it was a movie from the 60s. And as I said, what was jarring was that song, because that song took me back to the 1950s, like Showboat, early 60s, where you would have that song is completely part of what's going on, post and Civil War or whatever. I just, that was a bit of a thing. And that song and the hair together, that song in that moment really was and I also understand he just left you. You think he's the love of your life. You're allowed to weep and moan a little bit, but for the ending of the movie, I don't necessarily put that on the character of Fanny, but I put it on, the Ray Stark and the people who made this movie to say that shouldn't have been the ending. I agree with you. Yeah.
So let's talk about the best moments of the movie from our standpoint. I got to start with her very first line, which I think is in one of AFI's lists, either of best opening lines ever or even best lines ever, is you see her walking into the theater. You see Fanny Bryce's name in lights, right under Ziegfeld. It says Fanny Bryce and the Ziegfeld Follies. So she's a huge star. You see her from behind wearing leopard print everything.
You don't see in this opening sequence, the camera is behind her the whole time.
And following her into the theater. And then when she finally sees a mirror, the camera kind of moves to the side. She moves her fur coat out of the way. And this is the first time that a lot of people in America probably ever saw Barbara Streisand's face in close-up on a big screen. And her line is, "Hello, gorgeous." And it's a movie moment. I mean, it's one of those things that, whether you've seen this film or not, you're probably familiar with that moment, or you've heard something that is supposed to be echoing that piece. And you're like, oh, that's where that comes from. That's where that comes from. And it's just a great, what a great opening, and what a great way to introduce Barbara Streisand to all of America.
I think if you're Barbara Streisand and you're directing it, that is how you introduce yourself to the world. It was beautiful. William Wyler was so kind to her. Because it was a lovely, lovely shot.
Yeah, yeah, and again, what this whole movie is about, is whether or not she feels pretty, is pretty. I feel like she was saying "hello, gorgeous," even then, with a little bit of sarcasm.
I felt like it was too. I wanted to think that it was, oh, she's grown, and so that she's realized that there is a gorgeousness in her that maybe is not. But I didn't think that that's what it was. No. I think there was still some sarcasm in it.
Yeah, and that's the way she feels. It will be this character's insecurity until she dies, and yet she's able to be a little self-deprecating about it. Another great moment I thought was, we've already talked about I'd Rather Be Blue. The reason I think it's so great is because she begins that song so insecure. I mean, the lyrics of the song do nothing to further the plot along, but what is happening plot-wise throughout that song is she's becoming a star. All of a sudden, she's learning
what she can or can't do that will get a reaction from the audience, and whether or not she likes it or not. Yep. And if she does, it is a learning. We are watching her learn.
Yep.
That's the idea.
And it's this idea that she's wanted this her whole life, to have a spotlight on her while she sings. And at the first couple bars, you get the sense of, I'm not sure I actually like this because I feel very vulnerable, but I'd better just own it. And then there's this moment where she goes from fake smile to real smile. It just happens. The grapes that are on her shoulder, don't ask, just watch the movie, fall off, and she kind of seductively puts them back on her shoulder. And from then on, she's a star, and you just see it happen. And to pull that kind of a scene off, an editor can only help you so much. That's on the performer to actually have that star quality to do that. The
whole deal about being certainly a good film actor and actress is that we need to see what you're thinking. And because the camera can get so close to you, if you can't, and I'll be honest with you, Omar Sharif didn't do it all the way through this one. Lawrence of Arabia, I loved him in. And I can't, as I said, it's such a different actor seeing him in this, whereas Barbara, this is going to be a weird one, kind of reminds me a little bit of Ingrid Bergman, in that you look at her face, you can see what she's thinking, and you can see the decisions she's making, and that's what makes a brilliant performer.
Yeah, and I think Barbara Streisand did so well on stage because of that, and this gets really, but she has very big features. And so even from, beyond the third row, you can tell what she's thinking. Little tiny aside, I had a good friend of both of ours, our friend Rebecca, went to go see Jessica Lange in A Streetcar Named Desire on Broadway some years ago. She was in the second row. And at the intermission, she was like, oh, I can't wait to hear what my friends think about this because it's just brilliant. What she's doing up there is amazing. And she went to talk to her friends who were sitting in the mezzanine who hated it. And she was like, are we watching the same thing? Because she's doing such great work up there. And when she got back into her seat and watched the second act, she was like, nothing Jessica Lange is doing is making it past the third row. Because she's such a great film actress, but she doesn't know how to do that on a big Broadway stage.
And that is why you have two sets of stars. You have those who can do film and TV, and you have those who can do Broadway. Some can cross over, but it is different styles of acting. And Barbara showed in this. This is what Barbara showed. She could do both.
Yeah.
That's what this movie did.
She could tone it down and just act as far as the camera needed her to and no farther. Yeah. The other two, I mean, we've talked about the opening night at Ziegfeld Follies, just hilarious. I mean, the whole way through.
And she looked beautiful. I mean, that's the joke. That's a part of the problem I had also, is that she is so pretty. It's hard to sit there and say, how did your friends, how did they say you're ugly? And that was the thing, is that I'm saying, okay, I get how a person looks in the mirror and says I'm ugly, because you see only the bad stuff. But people around you, come on. If that were my daughter, I acknowledge she's pretty. Fuck daughter, because sometimes you're biased.
Yeah.
A friend, whatever, you can see whether the child is good looking or not. Again, obviously nobody cared about psychological stuff, so they said whatever came out of their mouth back in the day, but she's pretty. And I'm like, I don't believe you when you keep telling her that she's ugly.
I get that there's pretty and then there's beauty norms, because, one of the things that they knock her for at Keeney's was her skinny legs. You with the skinny legs. And she does have skinnier legs than all those other girls. Of course, in 2018, she has the preferable figure. Beauty norms would say all those other girls are overweight, and she's the one who's quote unquote pretty. Whereas in that era, so beauty norms are just, they are what they are. It's like, if you're not absolutely stunning, pick a period in history when you were, and just think about that, because everyone was. I mean, there's just, beauty norms do go in and out of fashion.
Norms do go in and out
all the time.
It was just as I said, that again, there were several things that took me out and of the moment of where I was supposed to be in time.
Yeah.
And that was one of them. But yeah, no, that was a funny opening night when she goes out there and is singing and turns to the side to show that she's actually pregnant. And that was a lot of fun.
And then quacks like a duck. And then at one point, there's a woman who sidles alongside her, and she's at eye level with her boobs, and she just goes, "Oh my God," and just kind of plays this, very kind of broad Jewish stereotype, but so funny. I was howling right along. The first time I saw that movie, they show shots of the audience just to say, oh, and by the way, the audience thought it was delightful. I was laughing just as hard as anybody in that audience, which hardly ever happens. Usually when a movie resorts to audience shots, it means that this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I was doing it anyway. I think they actually could have done this without shots of the audience, although they wanted shots of the audience so that Ziegfeld you could see on his face, I don't like this, and I disagree with the audience at this moment.
Yeah, the shots of the audience, I think, were not to the movie audience. They were to the story.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Do you have any others? Any big...
as I said, I enjoyed all the small comedic moments when she, and it's like, What's Up, Doc is one of my favorite movies of hers, because I do like screwball comedies. When she gets on the roll and is saying all of these fun dialogue, I love that. That's the Barbara. That's my favorite Barbara, is because she is really good at comic timing.
Yeah.
She gets it. Her interp when she says these lines, spot on, and that's what I enjoyed. So I was chuckling, at her lines throughout.
Yeah. And the great thing about Fanny, she is a funny girl. She's not only funny on stage, but she uses humor to get through some other tough spots. There's a great scene where a bunch of photographers catch her leaving the stage door. Her husband's been arrested, and so it could possibly be a big scandal. And she jokes her way through the whole thing until a photographer says, "Do you still love him?" And she doesn't have a funny answer for that one, so she just runs.
Right.
You can tell. It's like if it wasn't something that she could answer with comedy, she couldn't quite deal with it at that moment. The other obvious one we have to is the tugboat scene. Don't Rain on My Parade is just one of the big diva numbers of
it's a great
movie musical history.
Song, and she nailed it. She originated it. She nailed it. I mean,
hers.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
it is.
That's
hers. And so if nothing else, YouTube that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And if any time I hear of anyone else doing Funny Girl, I'm like, why? Like, this is just not, because there was a Funny Girl. Harvey Fierstein actually helped, make a few little edits to the book so that a London production could do another one on stage. And I could see bringing Funny Girl back to the stage. It's a good property, but it's just without Barbara, unless you have another Barbara at the ready to do this, like, why? It's on film. We have it. Find another thing to put on Broadway. Couple little fun facts. What I have written down here, everyone hated working with Barbara Streisand. Everyone except Omar, who they were having an affair.
And so I just go back to it could be that she was a complete and total diva by this time already. That could be true. I don't know. But I do think that we have to kind of throw in a little bit of benefit of the doubt, just because that was also a time that there was pushback, that if a woman had a strong opinion or had ideas, that men were going to label, oh, you're hard to work with because you're not submissive.
Well, and Anne Francis was one of her biggest critics, but I think Anne's whole thing was all of Barbara's strong opinions got my scenes cut.
Well, I was going to say,
but
Anne
possibly
Francis,
for the betterment of the movie, Georgia James was not that pivotal of a character to move this plot forward.
At that point, no offense, Anne Francis, but I feel like at that point you were kind of on your way down. I mean, she was more of a late 50s, early 60s. She may have felt like she was still on the rise, whatever. And I love Anne Francis, don't get me wrong, but that to me, I don't know. It just sounds like
but not. Most people did not have kind words for Miss Streisand at the end of this. And again, there are people who are difficult to deal with. As you say, there are also people with strong opinions. And if she were a man, would the story have been different? Totally open question.
Well, what's funny about this, though, so had this been, and this is the pro and the con of America and money. We talk about that, Hollywood is if we make money. Funny Lady was made because Funny Girl made money.
Yep.
Well, Barbara was able to push through all of that negative, she's hard to work with, because it was such a huge hit.
Yeah.
And so the fact that money was made, people are able to go, okay, well, we're still going to make it. And that happened with Hello Dolly. Okay, well, we're still going to, so I think that in this case, America's capitalism in their artistic realm worked to her advantage.
Yep. And I think a lot of this, again, might have been born also out of insecurity. Hell,
sure. She related to Fanny Brice.
Yeah, and we can say that Barbara Streisand was gorgeous until we're blue in the face. What's one of her directorial choices she made? The Mirror Has Two Faces, which again is another one of these ugly duckling swan things that she wanted to do both behind and in front of the camera.
Oh no, No, I'm with you. And I know she, at least for a long time, had a huge stage fright. And so that obvious insecurity going on there. So, no.
And
a
perfectionist.
Who's to say?
She's a perfectionist.
And that's a problem in the arts. Yeah. That's a problem.
If she sees something and it wasn't perfect, she might have said, nope, we need a 27th take. And everyone's like, can we please go home? And the key grip's going, Jesus, this woman. I can see that. Last little fun fact, possible Nick Arnstein's. Cary Grant was up for this role. How old would he have been in 68? It was around the time of Charade, right?
Yeah, no. Well, the Hitchcock stuff as well. I think he was too old.
Yeah,
he was too old.
But very charming.
He's very charming. Pretty. But I think I'll be honest with you. I think that we would have had some of the same problem that we had with Omar. I don't see a chemistry between the two of them. First of all, I do think he was too old for that.
Here's who I think would have been great. James Garner was up for this role.
James Garner for the role would have been great. To see whether they had chemistry, I don't know, but he would have been perfect as Nick Arnstein.
He couldn't have had any less chemistry than Omar Sharif had.
Well, that's true too.
So I think he would have been great.
James Garner would have been, James Garner would have been fine, and I think that timing wise would have been good for him. Cary Grant would have been 64.
Yeah,
that's too old. Too damn old.
The person I guess who got closest but didn't get it, Frank Sinatra.
My problem with that is that you'd have these two big egos. I mean, who gets top billing? You think Frank Sinatra is going to take second billing to Barbara in 1968? He was part of the Rat Pack. Fuck no, I don't think. And I think he was old too. 68 Rat Pack. He was in his 50s or something.
Yeah.
So no, I think he was James. Of those three, James Garner would have been lovely.
I think James Garner would have been. I wish we could have seen that movie just to see it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So your final diagnosis, Stacey, about Funny Girl?
I think it's a classic and should be seen because it is Barbara at her start, but also Barbara at her prime. And this character was one that she clearly connected with, and it is definitely worth seeing for that. I think that you will always be aware it's a movie. You will always be aware that it is a movie made in 1968. And so at that point, it's one of those where I've seen it now a couple times and I'm good. If I want to hear the songs, I'll listen, on Pandora or something. I mean, I just, it's it's a classic. Everybody should see it at least once, and then I walk away.
Yeah, I've seen it more than once, many more times than once. I will probably see it many more times again. This is a movie that definitely has its flaws, but this is one of those cases where one single performance, and she's in almost every scene, really does make up for any flaw that this movie has, you know, which I totally agree with you about. A little bit about costumes, a lot about hair. Totally see all those points. Totally get that My Man was probably not the best, you know, way to end this particular movie.
But you don't care.
But I don't care. It's Barbara, and she's doing such good work the entire way through. She has a voice that no one else on this planet has. I don't get people that say they don't like the sound of her voice. I literally don't understand what that means. She's terrific, and this is and so as the person who appreciates the diva, this is her biggest diva moment of her entire career, and you got to see it. You got to see it.
So that's POPeration.
I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
Till the next time, people.
You've been listening to POPeration with Eric and Stacey, the podcast that dissects popular culture one bloody organ at a time. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other podcast listening site or app. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at POPeration Room. Check out our website at POPerationRoom.com for all of the podcasts, our blog, swag, and games. Until next time, when we're back in the scrubs.
He's John Krasinski from The Office with abs.